Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Araceli, aka Chelly, and today on Chelly's Mental Wealth, we are going to be addressing defiant behaviors. I don't know why I'm doing this because I'm thinking like I'm gonna put it right here, Defiant behaviors. The reason why I'm talking about defiant behaviors is because I specialize in defiant behaviors. It's something that I am working with families on a daily basis, working with kids, teens, children, getting to know the families, and just really getting to know how I can actually help family members and a child, teen, or adult how to reduce the defiant behavior or figure out what's going on. Why are they behaving defiant? And by defiant, it means AKA, I don't want to follow directions. I just don't. It's very difficult, or you're hostile, you're aggressive. As long as you're safe. If you want to look at it in a more psychological, or you want to look through the DSM-5, they pretty much claim that it's oppositional defiant disorder. Like I mentioned in my past videos, well, actually on Instagram, I've been talking a little bit more on that. So if you're not following me on Instagram, please follow me because you're missing out. I was talking about how I'm trying to really stay away from using the word disorder because in my heart, I don't believe in disorders. I just don't. Yes, I work in the field. Yes, I get exposed by this language and lingo, but I don't like to call it disorder. That's just my personal bias opinion because of what I've been exposed to, what I've seen, what I've learned, even outside of the field, things that have just been coming out, new studies, just new things, So I really just try to stay away from calling defiant behavior a disorder because defiant behavior is just another way of a person saying, hey, something's up. Like I don't know how to say it. Sometimes it's because they just don't know how to say what's going on. So anyways, I don't want to get into a tangent in regards to defiant behaviors. So in this video, I'm going to talk about what is defiant behavior. I'm just going to briefly go over what does defiant behavior looks like. And then I'm going to talk about just possible triggers as to why someone would engage in defiant behaviors. And then of course, at the end, I am going to be providing, I would say maybe my top three interventions that I've seen that have worked. And honestly, it just depends on the family. It depends on the dynamics. It really just depends. Interventions and coping skills are not a one size fits all, like I always say. So you just kind of have to figure out what works, especially financial wise. It just depends. I try to use interventions and coping skills that are not expensive, that anyone can utilize, and things from home, things that can help with the situation depending on your financial status or just barriers you're having. Okay, so what is defiant behaviors, aka oppositional defiant behaviors or oppositional defiant disorder? What is it? As I mentioned, it's basically not wanting to follow directions. You just have a really hard time wanting to follow directions or not wanting to follow directions. It just really depends on the person, what they're going through. You're hostile, aggressive, you talk back a lot. It's very difficult for you to respond to authorities. You pretty much do your own thing. You don't like to really follow the rules. And then that's when people start to categorize certain kids and teens like under conduct disorder if they start to like engage in physical aggression towards like people or objects around their house, or just breaking stuff in the classroom. That's when you're gonna start to hear a lot, when you start to hear the word disorder, which it's very disheartening. The word that I like to say, it's difficult to hear that, and it does happen. But the important part is like if they get labeled, they get labeled. But just working with the child and just not allowing that label to really justify their whole like existence or their whole behavioral patterns, that's the most important part. That's what defiant behavior looks like. Within an adult, I did talk about it on my Instagram, an adult can just behave the same way. It could be something big, it could be something small, it could be something huge, like defiant behavior as to like you getting away with a lot of like criminal acts, and it's just like you're defiant, you don't care, you're gonna continue to do it because there's no consequences. That's an extreme example of being defiant. Or when the police officer is telling you to stop doing something and you continue to do it, or if your partner tells you to do something and he continues you to do it, you're just defiant altogether and aggressive. And so that's pretty much what it means. So it does look a little intimidating, or parents don't know how to respond when their child is like that, especially when it's super extreme. But on a moderate level, sometimes you're gonna see behaviors where they're just kind of like do whatever they want, and it's kind of hard. They're very impulsive. They're like, just doing their own thing. So sometimes when a person is very like meticulous and they like control, when they have a child that's not like that, it's difficult, and then it creates these triggers, right? Where sometimes the reason why why someone might behave in defiant behaviors, it could be a lot of different reasons. I mean, I can't even, if I can start with one, especially because a lot of people are talking about this right now, is, generational just patterns that a person tends to see, their adult, or sometimes it's not even being modeled. It's like literally in your genes. It's very amazing as to how many things literally gets passed on to you without you even knowing, unless you acknowledge it and unless your parent is communicating to you that this had occurred to me or this happened to me. And then you're like, whoa, I did that too, at the same age, but you never told me. So it's kind of interesting, and it's happened to me personally with personal things that I've spoken to with my mother, and it blows my mind how I engage in certain behaviors that my mother engaged in around the same age, and we never talked about it. And the same thing kind of happened with my son with the simplest thing, with the chapstick. I ate a cherry chapstick, he ate a cherry chapstick, which is kind of like, it's trippy. Like, I never taught him, I never told him. So I feel like defiant behavior can also be embedded inside someone if that's been a current behavior passed on into generations. And obviously some of the stuff is trauma related, where your environment causes you to be defiant because you're constantly being harassed, or you're being profiled, or people are being racist. All of that correlates to defiant behavior as well. Everything that happens outside of your home, society, what you see, what's going on at home, it all correlates. But obviously it starts in the home. If in the home there's not a safe space, it's gonna be difficult to manage the outside world. Much difficult to handle the outside world, because I've been in situations and I've observed where families try to instill and explain the badness of the world too much, where it makes a person be too anxious and defiant, or they don't even want to participate outside in society because all of these horrible things that are true and that might happen to them, but they don't even want to experience it because it's been repetitive and just embedded in them. And sometimes people might receive it in a different way, where it increases anxiety and they won't even want to go outside. But then I've seen people where they've listened and taken in all the information and made them resilient, they made them strong, they're very strong-willed and all that stuff. So it really just depends on the personality, but it's still instilling fear. And that's the important part, is whenever we want to educate about what's going on and why we're behaving a certain way, we need to make sure that we're projecting it in a way where it's not fearful. Because even just when we're communicating about past things that have happened, or current things that are still happening to us that's causing trauma because of race, because of our economic status, because we might not have, we're considered lower class or middle class. So, but one thing that I've noticed is that acknowledging that feeling, but also not instilling the fear about that situation, it goes a long way. Because if we continuously add that fear of that fear, it's just perpetuating that fear. That's what I experienced. That's what I've noticed, what I've observed working with different types of, basically working in the same economic status as mine. I'm considered middle low class, Hispanic. Another possible trigger could be because you're getting bullied in the school setting, or a school staff, whether it's a teacher, principal, recess, whatever, anyone that's involved in the school, and they have some type of verbal communication or any type of just interaction, and if it's negative, it might trigger defiant behavior. So that's why I always say communication is a big thing, making sure you communicate to the school and making sure that you communicate across the board, and that the school does the same interventions that you're doing in the home. Some schools are good with that, some schools are not. But I can't even stress this enough when I always say this. I always tell families that it's always worth a try. Even if they say no, like try. Because if you don't communicate, then because they're gonna come back to you and saying, oh, they're doing this and that. And I'm like, well, I told you, you need to do all this, and it helps. It helps your job. So if you are strong enough to have that conversation with the teacher, do it every single time. It helps set the child up to be more successful, and it helps the teacher know, oh, okay, these interventions work for the child. This is what works, this is what doesn't work, and hopefully they'll implement it. Because I understand some people don't respond well with loud tones of voices, screaming, but I also try to teach children and teens that you can't change an adult sometimes. You really just can't, depending on your circumstances. You're in a school, even if the parent advocates and says something to the principal, they won't do anything. Sometimes they won't do anything. So I always recommend either take it up to the school district, or move schools. If it gets to that extreme where you're really like, this is affecting my kid, like you yell too much, move them classrooms. This is another, I always say, move them to another teacher if that they don't want to do it. Talk to, you know, the district, and if they don't want to do it, then you're just gonna have to change them schools. That's like the extreme last minute thing, especially if you're trying to really help the child with the process of someone being super aggressive and just strict or boasty when they talk, that is triggering the child. Because sometimes it could be because they're autistic. You don't know. Some people are sensitive to noise. Sometimes you don't even have to be autistic. Sometimes you're just very sensitive to noise, that screaming and the yelling doesn't help you concentrate and being effective in a school setting. So it's just like communication. Oh, I have a moco, another again. Damn, I hate when I do that. So communication. I can't say this enough. Communication. One thing that I also wanted to add on to this video is what doesn't work for defiant behavior. So what could possibly increase defiant behavior, and it's not gonna work, is the hitting and the screaming. So if you use hitting and screaming as a way of disciplinary action, or as a consequence, or for them to stop a defiant behavior, then I mentioned in my Instagram that it might stop the behavior temporarily, but it's not gonna stop it forever. In a sense of, in the future, they might start exhibit certain anxiety and depression when they're an adult, and they're not gonna know or correlate, hey, where is this feeling coming from? Why am I feeling this way? And it's because fear has been instilled in them, because, you know, the parents have been raised that way, and then so forth, and then so forth, and then so forth. And, you know, it just keeps going on and on and on. And sometimes, like how I mentioned, it has to do with your genetic responses. You're used to that I'm grabbing the belt type of thing because it's been passed on, and it's like an automatic thing genetically sometimes. So we have to be mindful that hitting and screaming is a way of not helping the child change the behavior. But if you're feeling that way and there's some type of rage, I am pro like releasing your rage somewhere else. I mean, I have the, you know, Los Angeles Rage Ground. That place was amazing to me. I realized how liberating it is to really smash shit and break stuff, and just letting all that and rage out of there. It was very relieving. It felt great. It was just like, wow. So who knows, maybe when someone is doing that, it's a sense of relief. It's a therapeutic feeling. And if that's the case, maybe you need to put the child in an intervention where it increases that, like boom, boom, you know, like martial arts or boxing, or, and I know sometimes we can't afford that. We could do the Boys and Girls Club. Sometimes Boys and Girls Clubs might have some type of physical activity. You can always try, Boys and Girls Club is the first thing that pops in my head because that's free. But we have YMCA. Sometimes you might have a YMCA that might have those type of programs. If you can afford it, put them in a program where it does release a lot of like physical activity, and you hit, you punch. Teaching all that stuff is a great intervention. Okay, I didn't want to forget about that, because that to me is a trigger in itself, is hitting. If you've already hit for so many years and they've been doing great, and then all of a sudden they're turning a corner, that means that hitting it's not working anymore, and now it's trigger. So you have to switch it around. And sometimes you don't even hit, and then you hit, and it intensifies the behavior. So that doesn't work either because of the fear. And some kids will retaliate because it's like you're modeling. It's like, you're hitting me, I'm gonna hit you, you know, and they're gonna think that. It's like, monkey see, monkey do. So they're gonna wanna hit you. And then of course we're taught like, no, we're the adult and you need to listen. But the child is like, but it's really sad that sometimes people will use certain things to scare someone, whether it's like immigration or other systems that might take someone away from someone. So keep that in mind. The hitting doesn't really help, but if you're feeling some type of way, that means that as an adult, you need to figure out other outsources. Self-care is the main thing for the adult. That's a coping mechanism in itself. Interventions and coping skills for the caregiver is self-care. Do something that's gonna release it. However it is, but release it. And then it's gonna help you be more patient with your child. But you have to figure out a way where you release that rage if that rage is going on. And if it's something because it really is in you and you gotta let it out, then let it out. You know, that's just you. But you also have to recognize that, is it something that's external for me? Like, is there something in my life that's making me feel this way that needs to get reduced because it's not normal, you know? So you have to be mindful of that. You know, is it your environment that's causing you to get that way, and then in turn take it out on your child? So being self-aware is really important. So I don't know how I'm gonna add this in my video, but I am. Now keep talking, Araceli, whatever you were saying. I see patterns and I noticed that. So it's just important that we communicate to our kids, look, this is occurring. You might be behaving defiant because you're seeing this happening in the school. You're seeing this happening in our community. You're seeing it happening. Your friends are doing it. It's because of X, Y, and Z. Educating them in a way where they're able to understand and not instill fear, but give them that street smarts, because I get that. This is a thing for me in my experience is I was the total opposite. No one told me how the world was. I learned on my own once I went outside. Like, I was oblivious. I was like just like hiding under a rock, and I got taken advantage of, and then I started finding out some crazy things that I didn't know what was going on, and how society was just the bad stuff that we all know that's going on when it comes out to our class, our race, all that stuff, right? So all that stuff really does contribute to defiant behaviors. That's just the reality of it. Even in a high class, people who have money experience children that are engaging in defiant behavior. Defiant behaviors don't discriminate. It happens to people that are constantly being told yes. They're constantly being spoiled in a way. They don't know the answer no. And that increases defiant behavior because they think that it's always yes. So when someone says no, they don't care. It's always a yes to them. That's what they've been used to. So you see how it's kind of interesting how even if you're rich or poor, depending on the communication, the relationship that you have with the child or with the person, will contribute to how a person will behave in a defiant or less or whatever, right? So it's important that you don't overindulge a person or a child or a teen on things, because it creates those defiant patterns where it's just like, well, I'm gonna give an example with my kid. You know, he's the only child. He's giving everything all the time. So there was a point where he got used to it, and when we told him no, he threw a tantrum at Disneyland. Started crying, and then that's when I realized, like, wow, he's not used to having a sibling. He doesn't know how to share. He doesn't understand the concept of a team effort, that we're all a team, even though he doesn't have a sister or brother. His mom and his dad and him, we're all a team. We all get to pick and choose. But he was very defiant. He refused to pick the ride that we did, and when we said, you know what, this is it, we gotta teach him a consequence, and we left the park, and that was a consequence. And then he did it again when we were in Vegas, and I left again, and that was the second time, and that was the only time where he stopped doing that. And I kept explaining over and over and over, you need to understand that it's not always a yes, and explaining why it's not always a yes, you know, not just saying no because of no. We need to explain. So that's another trigger, is when you don't have that guidance, right? The extreme exposure of seeing an adult behave that way, whether it's in the home, outside, or authoritives, or you're having to be defiant and not knowing how to turn it on and off. And then if you're too overindulged and you're giving everything and it's always yes, then it creates defiant behavior in the near future, because it reinforces that. So like I always say, it's communication. It's the main thing. You're gonna hear me say that all the time, you guys. It's communication, it's problem solving, it's knowing how to validate, how to listen, how to just educate without instilling fear. It's the way we communicate, and kind of knowing the child and knowing yourself, because you don't know how they might receive it, because you never know. One thing that I've also learned is, even if you might communicate the most respectfulest way, sometimes a person is going to receive it a different way because of their own past experiences, whether it's trauma or bias or just experiences that triggers that, and it's going to remind them of that moment, which in turn makes the other person feel like, well, what's going on? Like, I don't know. It's kind of like, it's interesting. It's an interesting dynamics, because we're all kind of connected, you know? The child is connected to the adult is connected to the grandparents, and so forth and so forth. Because when I do go into home settings, I try to help family members, you know, not just the person that I'm working with one-on-one, but everyone, because everybody matters. Everybody matters. So if you're really trying to nip the defiant behavior and trying to really help a child follow directions and make them understand why they need to do this or why they need to do that, and also too figuring out, hey, Is this something that's a little bit more difficult for this person because they're more energetic, and there's gonna be levels to the you know, the non-defined, like sometimes it's uncontrollable, and sometimes we need to empathize on that. Like sometimes we don't realize, like, oh dang, like it's just like, but it's practicing. It's like if that child has a hard time controlling something, but they're really trying to, but it's very difficult, it's about practicing and not shaming the child and saying, you did it again. No, it's kind of like, oh, I see that you did, let's practice again. Like, let's practice controlling those impulsive behaviors, or let's release that impulsive behavior somewhere else while you're trying to control this. Sometimes it's that, because we're, you know, people who are very energetic, they need to be fiddling with something while they're retaining information. So everybody's different. So we need to figure out what really is defiant behavior. You know, is it because you're being a control freak? Is it because they really are not wanting to follow directions? Figure out why. Communication, that's an intervention. Communicate to the child, teen, or adult. What is going on? Why don't you want to do X, Y, and Z? How can I help you? You know, am I doing something wrong? Is it me? You know, I know it's difficult to do that with an adult because an adult can manipulate you when you do that. So, but with a child, it's a bit different because you're modeling that to them and you're teaching them, oh, okay, so that's how I communicate. That's how I can problem solve when I have a conflict with a peer or a friend or an adult at school or in the community with a stranger. Like, oh, okay, this is how I'm supposed to do it. So you're slowly just introducing that communication, problem solving, and then it reduces the defiant behavior. Even just sitting down and talking to your child, like, look, I understand you're doing this. You know, I'm gonna teach you about what we went through when we grew up, and X, Y, and Z, or this is what's in our history, in our ancestry history, and this is why maybe it's a little difficult for you to respond in this way or do this, but we're working at it. Communication and working towards a better way of processing things and not allowing to continue to re-traumatize situations that's going to reinforce a defiant behavior. So communication is a huge intervention. I can't stress that enough. Having a balance of rewards and consequences, because if you reward too much, it increases defiant behavior, and if you give too many consequences, it increases rebellion. So there has to be a balance. It just has to be, because when you're too strict, it reinforces a child to kind of go around and go do it. You know, you gotta leave some wiggle room. Okay, it happened to me. I didn't have any wiggle room, and I went around doing some, you know, some just sneaky stuff. My sister got a lot more wiggle room, and she didn't do the things that I did. She didn't have to sneak around and do weenie things like that, because they kind of learned with me and they wanted to take a different approach with my sister. So rewards, consequences, communication, and really just figuring out, is this because of me as a parent or an adult or a caregiver or a sibling, family member, friend? I'm gonna be completely transparent. A lot of the times it's the adult, okay? It's the adult that's dealing with a lot of stuff, a lot of trauma, a lot of stuff. And everybody's individual with their own trauma, depending on where they live, what they went through. We're all going through some stuff as adults, and then we subconsciously project that to our kids, and we don't mean to do it. You know, we just don't know any better. I think, in my opinion, because I went through that when I was, you know, as a parent, and I know my mom went through it, and I had to teach her and talk to her about it while working in my position and learning and seeing the patterns and saying, hey mom, this is happening and this is what I'm learning. Or, you know, mixing both worlds, mixing what I'm learning in the field and what I'm observing and what's working and what are my barriers, and then also learning new techniques and learning new things as to why, outside of, you know, the mental health professional world, because we know that they don't tell us everything. They want us, you know what I mean? So, and holistically, I try to integrate both and try to educate my mom and my parents and my brothers and my siblings as to, hey, I'm noticing this, and hey, and we all educate each other. And we're learning about it. We're learning, and I'm teaching them, like, look, you're picking up on my patterns, or no, I'm modeling this, or I'm sorry, we're learning how to communicate. So it's like this weird growing experience for me that I've been able to live with my siblings and my parents still, even at 30 years old. And I know a lot of people might be embarrassed of that, but I'm not embarrassed. I feel like it's a blessing in disguise, because it helped me heal a lot of wounds with my family, like with my mom and my dad. It helped me build a stronger relationship with my sister. We had our very, very lows, but it, you know, we've gotten better. defiant behaviors. It was a lot of like fighting and things like that. So it was a blessing in disguise living in the same home setting and then seeing my son and how modeling and what he picked up on and how my mom was spoiling him. So it was interesting because I was able to really just use my own personal experiences and use that to help other families and say, hey, I went through the same thing too. Maybe not as extreme, but this can be manageable. Or hey, maybe if you stop doing this, it could reduce the defiant behavior, or do this and this, right? So honestly, the main thing, I know I'm gonna be very repetitive: communication, rewards, consequences, spending one-on-one time. Oh, I can't even stress this enough. Spending one-on-one time, just spending time with your child. Spend time with your kid, get to know them, build a relationship, not be their friend, but damn, they're a human being. You know, they want you to talk to them. They want you to say, how you doing? You know, whether they're 2 or 3 or 4, the more you talk to them, it helps with reducing the defiant behavior. It helps with building that communication. And whenever they are feeling like they don't want to do something, hopefully when they're ready, they're going to talk to you. So yes, making sure you take accountability as a parent and saying, hey, am I being defiant too? Am I modeling that to my child, to my sibling, to my family member, to my friend? Are they copying me? Because that whole saying, what I always say, monkey see, monkey do, that's real. That's why the whole, when predators abuse another person and it just continues, it's the same concept. It's monkey see, monkey do. It's so sad, but it's the truth, and it falls under the very simplest behaviors to the very extreme behaviors. My plan is to continue to make videos on these specific interventions that I talked about to help people that want to help someone that's dealing with defiant behavior. And I will say that it's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of trial and error. It's not going to take 6 months. Sometimes it takes 2 years to really help someone figure out why they're behaving defiant. So, and sometimes it takes a really long time, because if people don't want to put in the work and they don't want to acknowledge that maybe that's what's triggering it, whatever it is, whether it's the environment, whether it's society, whether it's inside, whether it's everything, people don't put in the work, the defiant behavior is always going to stay there, and it's just going to keep getting worse. Or sadly enough, eventually people end up being incarcerated, which is something that I really try my hardest to explain to individuals, that it's just not worth it. It's not worth it, because once you're in that nasty system, and you know, I'm talking about like, you know, and when you get incarcerated, once you go into that type of system, it's so difficult for you to get out, and it's just a vicious cycle, because you kind of get used to it. It's that whole environment, you get used to it, you kind of become hopeless, and anything that can make a person or a child to avoid any type of law interaction, I did my job. Like, please, like, it's not worth it. It's just not worth it. And I always go back to the communication factor. Like, that's always been a main thing that's always helped everyone that I've worked in my experience, is communication, validating each other's experiences. Because if they don't communicate what's going on or why they're feeling whatever they're feeling, whether it's something that happened years ago or a couple of days or an hour ago, then that defiant behavior is going to continue to continue, because it's their way of saying F you. Like, you know, it's like, nah, you know. Or sometimes they can't communicate, so people behave defiant behavior because they don't know how to say, I want this, or I want attention, and then it becomes this attention, a negative attention type of pattern where they don't know, they get used to the whole, oh, this is the only time I get attention is when I behave defiant, when maybe you just need to spend time with the child for like 30 minutes to an hour, really just spend time, do fun things together, and they won't want to go look for that negative attention because they got their one-on-one positive attention. So one-on-one communication, rewards, consequences, accountability, knowing if you're the one that's contributing to the behaviors, and just modeling for the child. And whenever you do behave defiant, model for them. Be like, I'm so sorry, and actually work towards it. Don't just keep saying sorry. Because I went through that phase too, where I was like, I just keep saying sorry, and I'm not even changing my behavior. How am I teaching my son that? Because then I'm teaching him that, oh, I just have to say sorry and that's it. So making progress while you're saying sorry and acknowledging that you effed up, and then continue to get better and better and better, and less sorries and more of what you're actually saying that you're gonna do. You know, actions speak louder than words. Yes, they do. So I really hope that this video was helpful, had some information for anyone that wants to apply it. Please share this video for anyone that's interested in wanting to know about defiant behaviors and how they can help someone, whether you're a teen or a mom. Don't forget to poke the button if you like it. Shh, brother. And excuse me. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new to my channel, and I will talk to you later. Bye. Have a nice day. Oh, and don't forget, life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get. So you better be ready with your interventions and coping skills. All right? Because mental health and mental wealth is a versatile thing. It's a happy and not so happy thing. Okay? Remember that. Bye.
I think all of us should have a hobby of some kind. If they like to play, get them a good instrument and play. You don't have to try to make a living out of it, just play.